Health Matters with Karen Key.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, May is Autism Awareness Month, and joining me now is Professor Lorna Jacklin, Principal Consultant Pediatrician with the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of the Witwatersrand, and we're going to be talking about communication difficulties with autism. Professor Jacklin, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
We've spoken quite a bit on the show in the last few weeks about autism, and communication is quite one of those things that I think we've touched on it before, but it's one of those things I think that could be made a little better if there was this early diagnosis and early intervention. Does that play a very big role in how the child ends up communicating in later life?
Yes. Delayed language development is one of the key signs in children with autism. Children that don't talk might not be autistic, so not all children that don't talk are autistic, but it certainly is one of those signs that must alert one that there's something going wrong and you need to see a professional to try and work out what the problem is. And early intervention is really the answer. Whether it's autism or whether the child's got a hearing loss and that's caused the delay in speech, it's urgent to investigate and manage the child appropriately.
Now, I was just talking to Professor Green about this RSV virus, and he says, strangely enough, more boys are affected by this virus than girls, and it's the same with the autism spectrum disorder.
You know, it's boys are unfortunately the weakest sex, and realistically it is true that boys are affected by most conditions more than girls are.
And I was actually quite horrified to read that they're saying that local estimates are predicting that approximately one child born every hour in South Africa this year, 2012, may develop the autism spectrum disorder. That is an incredibly high number of babies.
Well, the prevalence coming through from America is 1 in 88 children. I do think that there's a bias in America because there's an advantage to being autistic as distinct from having another reason for your disability. But certainly the numbers do seem to be creeping up and up, which is frightening. One does need to, and that's the question being asked.
Why? Yes.
Yes, why? And we don't really have answers. You know, I think that's why a lot of research needs to be done so that we start answering it. We are detecting it more. That is a reality. There's a much greater awareness than there was before. So that is part of the answer. But I've been in this field for 25 years and been fairly aware of autism as a condition, and certainly I'm seeing it much more frequently than I was. So I do believe there's an absolute increase as well as a relative increase.
There is a great need, though, for people to understand exactly what autism is all about, because I think people watch movies or they'll see something on television and get a completely skewed view of what autism is, because there are so many different forms that fall under the autism spectrum.
And part of it, as we said, the language delay is really important. But not all children have got a language delay as in speaking late. Some of them speak at the age of appropriate age, but their language is different. And those are the children that are going to get missed early because they are speaking. And it's really the communication, their social behavior that becomes the problem. And these children present, rather than with a language delay, they present with severe behavioral problems, hyperactivity, aggression, anxiety, and other behavioral problems.
Because there's all kinds of different problems when it comes to the communication. I mean, because some children battle with auditory processing as well. They hear but they don't quite understand. They can't quite process it in their brain.
And the parents will usually say to you, I speak to him and he just ignores me. And in fact, one sees that in the clinic, where you speak to the child and the child just pretends that you're not there. And these children, and that is why many autistic children are also diagnosed as deaf initially. That's quite frequently.
Oh, really?
Early diagnosis is deafness. And then when the hearing is actually tested, the audiologist finds that the child can hear but is not listening. And that's the auditory processing. That's the problem.
And a lot of children with autism are very high functioning.
No.
With Asperger's, well, let's say autism, but Asperger's.
And that's what's changing, not a lot, but we used to say that 80% are quite severely intellectually impaired. I think that there's a shift across with us being more alert and picking up the milder conditions. That certainly the American literature is now saying that it's 50-50. But certainly the majority are intellectually impaired.
And Asperger's, how different is that to...
You know, Asperger's has actually been thrown out of the door with the new DSM-5 classification, which is coming out this year, because it's not, you know, it's a term that's being misused. Sometimes for some parents it's a more comfortable term than autism, and they've looked at it and decided that it's not a useful term at all. So as we are classically understood Asperger's, it would be children that have got normal language development, but used in a abnormal way. It doesn't really mean that they're brighter than children than the high-functioning autistic, whereas the high-functioning autistic would have delayed language, but would often have other good skills. But it's not a very useful terminology, so it's really not going to be used in the future.
So Asperger's is not going to be something that's going to fall under the autism spectrum?
Well, it's just the word Asperger's
yes.
is now being integrated into the high-functioning autism description. So the DSM-5 is actually going to make us describe autism in a much more useful way, where you really are describing the child quite accurately, whereas the terminology at the moment is a bit confusing.
I was reading some of the descriptions and I thought, gosh, you know, if I was a parent and was told something like that, I wouldn't actually know what they were talking about half the time. With some of the descriptions are quite, I mean, there's one that they don't quite know what it is. It's I can't quite think of the term now, but it's one of those it's a non-specific.
Okay. Yes, it just says non-specific. So
yes.
the DSM-4 at the moment just says not otherwise specified.
Yes.
Yes, it is very vague. So it's not very useful at the moment.
And it's going to be getting better now, you say. They're going to be changing the terminology, which will help a lot.
Which I think that once the DSM-5 comes out, it would be useful to have a program to discuss how we're classifying autism. The new classification is going to be quite an interesting discussion.
I think so, because as I said, now at the moment they're totally confusing us. So, but the whole communication thing, you know, if people are worrying about that, if they have a child that falls under the autism spectrum, there is something that you can do. If they pick it up early enough, if you don't pick it up early enough, can the communication be? I mean, can you get it to a level where the child can communicate, even if you've left it a little bit late?
Intervention always makes a difference. There's never a point at which intervention is not going to help. But the research shows that if you can diagnose it very early, you can change the way the brain functions. You can actually help the brain to function more efficiently with earlier intervention. And the research, there's a strong genetic link with autism. So many children will have a younger sibling who's also autistic. And if you diagnose the younger sibling very young, you can make a significant difference to the development of the baby that's diagnosed early.
So once you've diagnosed one, obviously you would then look out for the symptoms with any further children.
Yes. You should always be, siblings of autistic children should always be looked at very carefully. And if you notice any deviation in their development, that intervention starts very early.
Gosh, well, Professor Jacklin, I'm afraid we have a rather shaky line. You've been coming and going on this line, unfortunately, so I would have loved to have talked to you a lot longer, but I think this line is actually detracting from what we've been saying. But as you say, once they've brought in this new definition, I'd love to speak with you about that again later in the future. But thank you very much indeed for joining me on the show this evening.
It's a pleasure.
Professor Lorna Jacklin is Principal Consultant Pediatrician with the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of the Witwatersrand. For more information on this subject, you can contact the South African Speech, Language and Hearing Association on 0861 113 297, 0861 113 297, or by email admin@SASLHA. So that stands for South African Speech, Language and Hearing Association. It's just the letters, SASLHA, admin@saslha.co.za.